So, and now we finally have gotten to somebody that, we knew we were going to cover, but I was always waiting for this segment because it's just going to be, there's a lot you can process in this. And I have really no concept of whatever angle any of us are going to take. So I'm kind of fascinated as to what we might get to. But first, Matt, tell everybody who the hell we're talking about.
All right. So this is Tom Waits with Swordfish Trombones. It comes in at number 50 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 7 in 1983, number 385 of all time. It is Tom Waits' second highest rated album behind 1985's Rain Dogs, which we will cover in an upcoming full episode. This album, again, did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Tom Waits is ranked number 49 in overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. And I think John starts this one off.
Yeah, where do we begin on this one, guy? I mean, like to me,
a lot to unpack.
If the ESG album was entirely processed by me as an emotional experience, devoid of like the intellectual part of it, like I had to go into like an intellectual space to even begin to process this album, because like this is not an album to me that for my sonic palette, right, is ever going to be called enjoyable. So then the question becomes, okay, if I process this in a intellectual space, am I going to be able to derive knowledge and greater learning and musical IQ from it? Because I mean, toward the end of listen number 2, I'm like, okay, yeah, this one's never going to get into my soul. You know, it just isn't. It's not. And I always wonder, like, is it even designed to, or is it designed to get in the soul of, we talked way going back to Trout Mask Replica, right? And some of the albums like that. Like,
there's definitely a Captain Beefheart line that comes through here.
My line is, it's the Captain Beefheart of Trout Mask Replica, not the Captain Beefheart of Safe as Milk, that one. And like there's also like a weird line to like Bruce Springsteen like on this as well. Like, so it's like if you took Trout Mask Replica and put a dash of Bruce Springsteen and then put in a little bit of Dylan, right, and then old blues like like Leadbelly, and then you put it through a guy who at times sounds like he smoked 3 cartons of cigarettes in a day, at times feels like he's taking on a character voice, and at times is just giving you a very sparse composition that's as much about listening to the music in the background. Some of these tracks feel like the found music approach, like sounds, right, that are just coming, that are either evoking a mood or a setting along the way. So yeah, I'll start by saying this entire album was an intellectual experience for me. And that's how I'm going to analyze it. There are interesting lyrics on this album. There's definitely character sketch type songs and slice of life type songs. In that way, it kind of resembles something like a Nebraska that we covered earlier, or some of the Dylan, detached, character study type songs. But he gets more personal than Dylan does. In terms of his lyrics at times. It's got the Nebraska thing. There's a song specifically about Johnsburg, Illinois, right? That's about a place, but also about emotions.
Yeah.
I can't say that I'd give this a strong thumbs up. It also, this is really, if you're gonna like love this album, you're gonna love it because you have a level of musicality or musicianship that you're centering in on things that don't immediately click with me, or I think you're going to come to it from associating a little bit with the characters that Tom Waits sketches. There's even like a little bit of like a concept feel to this album. Would you guys say?
Yeah, sure.
About sort of like folks that are kind of at the end of their rope, I'd say would be the general theme lyrically of what's going on here. There's a lot of like occupational type songs, like soldier, butcher, different stuff like that, barkeep, stuff like that. And I also think this is the type of album, and I don't want to over punt my lane here too, but like, I feel like this is the type of album that if you had a substance abuse issue or some sort of addiction issue, it particularly would resonate with you, because there's a thematic feel and lyricism, I think, that I just get. I could be completely wrong, but I feel like would really connect from an atmospheric standpoint. So I'll leave it there, and I'll come back to it. But I'm curious to see what you guys thought.
I see what you're saying. I like this album, and I feel like it was eminently listenable. I didn't feel like it was necessarily challenging in the way that some of the other albums we listen to are. I come from Tom Waits just knowing his acting first and foremost, and all the different kind of small roles that he's done, and I feel like that is it gives me kind of a perfect idea of what his music was like as a result, not unintentionally knowing, after, kind of looking back. He kind of dabbles in all these different things on this album, and he, like you say, John, he kind of plays different characters. I feel like he plays different types of music in here. It's very much kind of a troubadour type jazz person / busker on the street / person that would be in Paris with a monkey grinding out an organ or something, versus like some old drunk at a tiki bar singing some music or something. It's also got elements of blues in it for sure, on a song like Gin Soaked Boy, which is on the second half of the album. You've got different really different instrumentation. I guess he uses a harmonium a lot on this. I was looking that up, and for the element, it's got like synth on it also, but the harmonium seems to be some sort of like interesting kind of instrument that he comes back to again and again on this album. It almost reminded me of like the accordion that we mentioned earlier on the album, or the album. And I think not to mention the spoken word that's on this album that at times comes up with, like on Shore Leave, and there's definitely another song on here that I can't find that has that. He also has this like soulful quality to him and sad quality in his singing when he sings. His gravelly voice really works for me. I feel like that ties everything together in a way. Like you were saying, John, there's kind of these heartfelt stories about towns and people and places, and the way that Bruce Springsteen sings, and 16 shells, like when Matt did the impression, 16 shells from a 30-06. That's kind of exactly what I'm talking about in terms of his delivery and what he's trying to get across. He's really trying. I think he ultimately identifies himself as a storyteller, and I think that's what he's trying to do through this album and through his music. And however it takes, I feel like in some ways this could have been a book of short stories or sketches that he wrote down first, and that was kind of the basis, and then the music came later. That's kind of how I see this album, but it's not overly abrasive or challenging in the way that we always come back to Trout Mask Replica, in the way that was. It doesn't feel schizophrenic in a like can't keep track of it sort of way. I feel like it's a nice pastiche of all these different things, and I really like listening to it. And but on the other hand, I'll end with, it's probably not for everyone, and I can totally see why he came at it from an intellectual perspective, and might not respond to this respond to it emotionally in the same way that a lot of the other albums we talked about this week. But it is interesting, and I think it is listenable and different in a way, and unique than other artists that we've listened to, especially in the 80s. So.
Yeah, I had some idea of what we were getting into here. My brother's been a big Tom Waits fan for many years, and I've heard some of these songs already. I didn't really know this album. I have a couple of Tom Waits records, but I never had this one. So for the most part, this was a fresh listen for me. And man, talk about unique artists. I mean, coming off the heels of talking about Talking Heads, I mean, this guy is really stands alone, with what he's doing. It's very, yes, it's which you kind of going along the same lines what you guys are saying about being a storyteller, drawing a caricature, exploring different types of characters. It's very cinematic. Like some of this seems like it could be from like a movie soundtrack. It's theatrical. He does a lot of different things with there's definitely like a blues rock aspect to what he does. There's definitely a folk aspect. There's just a jazz, kind of like a underground jazz club. Like a lot of the stuff just seems to me like, especially the slower piano songs are just him at a playing on a piano in a bar with like four other people there that are just wasted, and he's like got just smokes all over the place, and he's playing at like 4 o'clock in the morning or something like that in New York City specifically, right?
On Skid Row.
Yeah,
it's
very
a bar
evocative.
that most people don't go to. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's very evocative in that way. That album, it's interesting.
And so,
can I just also say, Matt, that we didn't mention it, but like I think the moments where it's hot, like the higher points for me, line up with sort of the free jazz elements as well that we covered earlier in the show's run. So when you mentioned jazz, I think that's a good comparison, because I think that's where for me the inner.
Yeah, I feel like it takes you in a little. Some of these takes you in a time machine back to the 1930s or something like that. And so his voice is crazy, like what he does with his, it's especially.
Should Tom Waits be in Talking Heads?
God, no, that I don't know, that might be a little bit much, but yeah, like I think I said this last week. It's underground, like it sounds like Cookie Monster's kind of singing, and he doesn't always
Howlin'
do that.
Wolf is the other guy, the artist Howlin' Wolf. He's the guy who I always compare to Tom Waits, because I know he sounds different at other times, right? He sings
and this
more
is
traditionally,
he's clearly not trying to. It's like when Dylan, did Nashville Skyline. Dylan can sing, quote unquote, normally, more normally, and Tom Waits can too. But this is clearly he's going for a feel and a vibe that is his own. I think this is, to me, this is definitely a night album, like a late night album.
For sure.
And it's got one of the 16 Shells from a 30-06 is just a kick-ass song. That's like junk rock,
it's the best track of the album, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's, I would like more songs like that on this record. It is my favorite. And it's like he just passed by a junkyard, and like a bunch of guys decide like, hey, pick that up. Let's just start banging on this or hitting that or whatever. And it all just fits so well. The percussion's really cool. It's got this great groove. His voice is awesome. It's a badass song. That is a freaking really great, unique song. But I think that it's got some really pretty piano type ballads that he's doing as well. He's got some weird instrumentals, like the Dave the Butcher kind of was like this. Another one of those. Josh, I was thinking of you as another one of those kind of carnival-esque.
Like really's borderline there for me.
Yeah, it's definitely in there, and it's kind of weird. It's not my favorite, but I think I probably would like this album if it did more traditional, kind of songs, like a 16 Shells from a 30-06, like a Gin Soaked Boy, or Swordfish Trombone even. I thought that was kind of a cool song.
In the Neighborhood, though, too. I really
In the
like
Neighborhood's
that.
great. Yes, that's another
too. Yeah.
That's another good example. That's almost like from a show tune or something like that,
exactly.
and more traditional. So much happening here. I still think that I need more time with it. I think that this is definitely something that would grow on me more, but I also think it's something that it's harder to get into if you're not in the right mood for it or the right time or place. And it's of all the records that we covered this week, there were definitely times I put it on and I was going, this is a weird time to listen to this record. This is not that I am not going to get the most out of this, at 2:00 in my office at work. It's just not going to happen.
Josh is right though. It's not inaccessible. It's not like impossible to listen to. And when I say intellectualize it, it doesn't mean that I couldn't get in there. It just was sort of the sporadic nature of it, I think was. I also, as you know, and I've been I struggle a little bit with like these character study things. Like they can sometimes be a little bit over the top melodramatic for me, that I think that I'm supposed to think of them as profound, but like a song like In the Neighborhood was a little Springsteenian, like at his worst. It's like, the whining dog, pigeons, steeple bell, rope, Saturday bride, Filipino girls giggling by the church. It's like, ugh. It's, some of that stuff is kind of like, like it's like a bad beat poet sometimes. And, Dylan can be guilty of that, I think, sometimes too. And I know for some people it's like, you're the troubadour of the streets. And for me, sometimes it's kind of like, ugh.
Well,
so
me, John, you could say all that cliche or what all that stuff is that the music's there, because In the Neighborhood's it's a great musically, melodically, it's a good song. I mean, as compared to something like Frank's Wild Years, which is kind of like, it tells the story of Frank burning down his house, and that I could pay attention to because that's all.
Well,
because
like
it's spoken
mic.
word.
He's an open mic.
It's not a song, right?
Right.
He's telling a story with like some instruments playing in the background, but there's not like any structure to it. It's just kind of this. It's like a beat poetry kind of thing. So I'm okay with it. I mean, it's one track, and it's maybe it does a little bit of it somewhere else. It's a short track, it moves on and it goes on to the next thing. And so I think the variety certainly helps this album. If there's a certain aspect of this that you might not like, just wait till the next song, right? Because chances are it's going to take you in a different direction, and you might gravitate towards that, because he's hitting on a lot of things here that I don't know if anybody ever hits on this stuff. This guy is as unique as they come. But you're right, it does have that Captain Beefheart, avant-garde
Laurie Anderson
nature to
is
it,
another person who
art rock,
Big Science. There's a little bit of that Laurie Anderson Big Science.
She seemed artier to me. So that was more of like an art project, where this is kind of like, I think Josh is right. I think storytelling is kind of like
poet or something,
and poetry, and evoking a particular feeling or atmosphere. I mean, more so than almost anything that we've covered. When I hear this, I'm getting vivid images in my head of a scene or of a place, of a person, and I think that he does a phenomenal job of that. And maybe it's because of that theatrical cinematic nature, that I come up with. So.
But that happens to me a lot, Matt. Like that's why it didn't stand out
it doesn't
to me, because
happen.
I go in that space a lot, where it's like, okay, here's the literary thing, where like I create the character in my head,
And I think that's a difference. Like I need it to slap me over the head, like multiple, like this album is doing in every song. Like I need it to be that apparent, because I usually don't do that, but I certainly feel that when I listen to this record and Tom Waits in general. It's definitely not for everybody. There are people that will listen to this and be like, what the hell? This isn't even music. What the hell is this? But I think it's cool. I think that it is accessible enough for me. And that's one of the cool things. That's why a song like 16 Shells from a 30-06 is just like, is a perfect Tom Waits song, I think. And if I was to say, like, what's a Tom Waits, like, play me a Tom, what's the one Tom Waits song I need to hear? I probably would play you that, So I got to go thumbs up on this. It's not for everybody. It's not even for me all the time, but it's when I'm in the right place for it. I think it's really cool. It's an interesting listen, to say the least. So I'm thumbs up.
If Underground had him making even a half attempt at a traditional voice, I think that would also be a standout for me. It's not that I didn't dislike it, even with him doing that, like, as you said, Cookie Monster, grumbly voice. But I mean, it's, sometimes it's like there's definitely a good friend of mine, we always talk about persona, right? It's like the greats take on a persona, but they do it in a way that you almost don't realize they're taking on a persona. Sometimes for me, this walks the line of like carefully curated persona and real persona, you know, and like,
So it's too calculated.
I feel like it's a little calculated. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like he was going for, and it's okay. I mean, to some degree, all musicians are calculated, you know, like, and I don't do that, but I think at times it worked for me more than I thought it was going to. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't more of a like intellectual experience than it was a truly music, like invoking all of my senses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thumbs
Well,
up though for me.
for you. Yep. I would say, I can't say thumbs down. I just right in the middle for me.
Yep.
I'd say. Yeah. With that being said, I don't know if I ever need to come back to this album. Yeah.
I'd be
Yeah.
interesting how well, we're going to do Rain Dogs, and if memory serves, I think that's maybe more accessible, or so it'll be interesting to see what you think of
Yeah,
that.
the more I go back and think about it, the more this album reminds me of Big Science by Laurie Anderson in some ways. I really do. I think they're both like art, like to some degree curated art pieces, but Waits is more going into different directions, where Laurie Anderson was coming from like a more esoteric, where Tom Waits is very concrete, like his imagery, whereas Anderson's stood out for the fact that it was bizarrely, you know, not connected to anything. You know who else is, you know, I can't believe I'm going to, you know who else has elements of like what Tom Waits is doing here is Kate Bush.
Oh yeah,
Like creating these characters, you know,
Yes.
along the way. But like hers is more ethereal or like, you know, childlike, or, you know, but she veers all over the place. So
Yeah.
like that's another person who does that.
yeah.